All right, friends, welcome back to History with Tim Reacts. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be reacting to a very famous Sabaton song, probably one of their, up there ones. It's also one of their more controversial songs because it sadly does have connections with Swedish ultranationalism, but it's because of who it's about. The song is called Carolus Rex, and it's about Charles the 12th, King of Sweden. Now, the song is about Charles in general. He was King of Sweden from 1697 to 1718. He was a very young man. He would lead these campaigns against three of the biggest superpowers of the region. And this is also kind of an intro to our next series, because I told you we're going to be starting a new series. I thought I would do it on the Western Civil War in the United States, but I decided, let's change it up. We'll do Europe again. We're going to do the Great Northern War, which Charles was actually responsible for starting. Well, not really responsible for starting. He was a very big instigator in it, though. That's when Denmark, Poland, and Russia made an alliance to fight against the Swedish Empire that was growing as a North Sea superpower. At the end, the Prussians would also get involved, which would also kind of be how they solidified their position. But we're going to be watching and reacting to Carolus Rex from Sabaton. Thank you so much for joining me today, friends. I know I've been off and on. Like I said, when I started making my gameplays, holiday season's always brutal. So we're going to do this one, and then we're going to start content this week. Thank you so much for joining us today, friends. I hope you enjoy. Alright, so as I said, this is about Charles the 12th, King of Sweden. Now, as I said before, he is going to be the catalyst of the Great Northern War. It's his campaigns and everything that lead us into that conflict. He wanted to expand Sweden. He wanted to do better than his predecessors. He's coming from a very strong Swedish bloodline. The bloodline of Charles XII is actually no longer even kings of Sweden anymore. The current king of Sweden is actually descended from Jean Bernadotte, who was actually a Pyrenees French marshal under Napoleon. So the current Swedish royal family is, and I don't want to say they're not Swedish, but they're actually French and borderline Spanish. But this is Carolus Rex, and this is about him. So let's get into it. So, as I already said, he was very young. He was a very young guy. This is clips from a movie about Poltava, which is a great movie. I need to find where this movie is, to be honest. But, so this is about Poltava. Poltava is pretty much where Charles's reign came to its end. What he did was he invaded Russia, which, again, not a smart idea, because one of the oldest and truest Russian strategies is scorched earth. So they pretty much destroyed everything and thinned out his supply lines the same way they did it under Napoleon and the Germans in World War II. But he had actually defeated the Russians many times, and he actually marched into Poland, deposed the Polish king, and put his own viceroy, well, not viceroy, but his own puppet king in charge of Poland. Like I said, his goal as a young man was he wanted to cause this Swedish supremacy over the North Sea. And he almost achieved it, but the issue that really came to bear upon him was more so the fact that the Sweden is not a very population-dense area. Russia, Poland, Denmark, they have very big, at this time period, big density in population. Sweden really did not. But that also kind of was a plus for him too, because that meant his soldiers, this is what you call Carolinians, these were the best soldiers in Europe. They were some of the best soldiers in Europe, and this is why they were able to beat the Russians and the Polish and the Danish at so many battles The only other army that was well trained as this before this time period, I believe, was the British New Model Army, which was created by not Oliver Cromwell. Well, he helped, but Thomas Fairfax during the English Civil War, which was actually during the time of Charles's predecessor, Gustavus Adolphus. But let's continue on. So, 15 years I've waited to sit upon my throne. Charles's father died when he was very young. So what ended up happening was regencies had to take over as King of Sweden. I believe his sister was his regent, actually. Oh no, his sister succeeded him. He truly believed he was chosen by God. He believed he was the divine leader, the absolute leader of Sweden. So when he was able to finally ascend the throne at his young age, he actually told the Swedish aristocracy, oh no, I'm not swearing any oaths to you, I'm not swearing oaths to the people, I'm not doing any of that. I'm swearing oaths to God and Sweden. He's like, those are my two jobs, God and Sweden. So he was very much, I don't want to say a no-nonsense, but he was very much a no-nonsense kind of guy. He was very much, this is my job in life. He definitely believed he had a destiny, and this was his destiny. You know, another person you could actually compare Charles to would actually be someone like Alexander the Great. Because if you think about Alexander the Great, his army was not that big at first. His army only got bigger because it gained from his conquered territories. Charles didn't even have that going. You know, I believe it was something like 11 years, the Great Northern War. That was 11 years these men were away from home, away from their families and loved ones. And they were, of course, winning. So at home, you know, people made a sigh like, oh, well, you know, at least they're fighting for the country. At least they're winning. But, you know, Charles relied on victory. He needed the victory to keep his army's morale good, and he needed victory to make sure back at home there was no rebellions or revolts against his rule. Because, again, he was campaigning. He was not even in Sweden. He was mainly fighting on the fronts. You know, he would unfortunately meet his death, I believe, in Norway. He did not spend much of his adult life in his kingdom that he was supposed to rule. He handed things over to regents that would run the government while he was gone, that he trusted. But he, you know, this was a man, is very similar to actually also Richard the Lionheart. Richard the Lionheart spent more time in France than he did in England. Now, again, this is video from a movie about Poltava, but there's something important that when we're doing this Great Northern War series that you need to remember. Russia at this time was not a superpower. Russia had just come out of an anarchy era. You know, like there was a czar every other few years, people were dying back and forth. Peter the Great, who is leading the Russian army at Poltava, he wants to westernize Russia. He and his beliefs see Russia as a third-rate power because they are still in the Middle Ages. He wants to modernize them so they can take on the powers of Europe. He implemented things like beer tax, things like that. He wanted to make Russia more like Europe. So what the Great Northern War did, though, because at this era, okay, you can have the Enlightenment, you can have all of the fashion, you can have all of this, but in order to stay on pace with European nations, you needed to have a European army. You know, we look at history and we think to ourselves, well, how was Europe able to do so much? You know, Europe, if you really look at the span of the world, has influenced every single continent. How were they able to do that? And, you know, we always try to say it's, through philosophy, through architecture, through this. It was through their military. You know, people used to say the British Army was something that was fired from the British Navy. Or whereas most nations have a state, Prussia had an army. The fact, if you did not have a good military, you were not going to beat a European nation. So a perfect example would be, honestly, the Zulus. You know, the Zulus, okay, they won the Battle of Asanawana in January of 1879. That's good. They beat a European power. They were only facing a regiment, though. When the British brought the full might of their army down to Africa, they defeated them. They destroyed them. You know, this is something, and even in the Congo, which, you know, I, as someone of Belgian heritage, that's something, you know, we carry shame for, because that was a horrible thing that King Leopold did. They trained the Force Publique to be a European military. So, you know, you had, in order to, and actually, a really good example, look at the Meiji Restoration. He wasn't trying to make a samurai army. He wasn't trying to make an Imperial Chinese army. He was trying to make a European army, and that's what they did become. And that's why Japan entered such a heavy imperialism era after the Meiji Restoration. So Peter needed to become a European military, and the issue was Russia was always an army of conscripts. So that is why at the beginning of the war, as we'll discuss in the series as to follow this video, and I will do reactions because they have a whole album called Carolus Rex, but Peter needed to modernize his army and have them be a fighting force like the Carolinians, because the Carolinians were a significantly smaller force, but they were constantly defeating them. And again, you could say it's on strategy, you can say it's on morale, you can say it's on a lot of things. But the reality was they were just a better equipped and better trained force. So that's what happened before Poltava. Peter said, we're not running anymore, we're training, we're drilling, we are making this an army. Because the thing is, this army, however this war ends, this army needs to be able to defend itself from the jackals that are going to attack now that they smell blood. Because, you know, if Russia were to lose, you know, Poland, it's at this time a puppet of Sweden. Maybe Poland wants to take territory. Maybe the Ottomans want to take territory. Maybe the Prussians are getting a little, you know, excited and they think, oh, well, Russia's defeated. Or how about the biggest empire that's sitting on Russia's doorstep, the Austrian Empire or the Holy Roman Empire, they can take out a chunk. So it was very important to modernize his military to be like this. And honestly, that was Charles's downfall, that he gave Peter the time to do that. Okay. Oh, that's quite a spot to stop for this part. So, something you're probably all wondering is why is Charles sitting in a bed at Poltava? I believe he was shot in the foot a few days earlier, which made him unable to ride his horse. He was in great pain and everything. So what they did was they brought, I think it's called a litter or something like that. They brought that onto the field so he could still command the army. And at first at Poltava, it looked like the Swedish were going to win. The Carolinians were routing the Russians, but the thing was that was the Russians' plan. The Russians wanted them to get routed because then it was actually kind of similar to what Napoleon did at Austerlitz. He got the Carolinians' morale up that they pursued, and then they slammed right into Russian reserves that were awaiting them. As I said, so after I'm just going to explain this now because the song is kind of glorifying Charles, whereas it doesn't explain what happened after Poltava. After Poltava, Charles was so deep into Russia, he was closer actually to the Ottoman Empire than he was to Sweden. So with the men that survived Poltava, which was not a lot, they got defeated soundly at Poltava. He fled to Sweden into the Ottoman Empire, where the Ottomans, who are the hereditary enemy of Russia, were like, yeah, no, you can stay here. I believe he stayed there for like 10 years. He stayed there a long time. Like, it was actually kind of, he very much overstayed his welcome, and then he ended up getting evicted by the Ottomans, and he tried to fight them, and then he saw the Janissary army outside the castle the Ottomans had loaned him, and he's like, yeah, I should probably go back to Sweden. When he got back to Sweden, obviously Sweden was in disarray. They hadn't had their king for, I believe, almost 20 years at this point. Norway had gone into rebellion and were trying to get independence. The Russians were taking up Swedish territory, and Charles refused to negotiate. He in his mind he thought, I'm gonna retake this. Let me get back to Sweden. Let me raise another army. Let me train them. I can retake my empire. He would unfortunately be killed at a siege in Norway, and that would be the end of him. And sadly, his family would then fall from power. I believe the next monarch, who would be his sister, I believe, and then the family. I forgot which family succeeded them. That family would stay in power until, I believe, 1812 or 1810. That's when Jean Bernadotte would take the Swedish throne as King of Sweden, and that's the royal family that still rules Sweden to this day. So Charles's last words were, "Don't be afraid." So the way he actually got killed was he was inspecting front, which he did often. He would go ahead of his army. Well, he would go into the vanguard and he would inspect and see what was going on. So when they were besieging this fortress, he popped his head up, and there's many different stories about what happened. Some people believe he was assassinated by one of his own soldiers. Some people, which the general belief is he got popped off by someone in the fortress that saw a head pop up. He wore a very basic uniform. He didn't wear, like, he did not... The thing about these great commanders, like these actual good generals, they don't like to peacock a lot. He wore just a basic officer's uniform. So from a distance, it probably just looked like a soldier, and he got shot in the head, unfortunately. I believe they did exhume him to inspect to see if possibly it was an assassination from one of his soldiers who didn't want to fight anymore. But I believe it found it negative, but I don't know how you really figure that out by... There'll be a picture, and there's actually a picture of his skull with the bullet hole in it. When they exhumed his body. But that was Carolus Rex. Alright, friends, so as I said, this is the start to our Great Northern War series. I decided to do Carolus Rex just because I've done Poltava before, and I really enjoy that song and the music video. The battle, not so much, because it's very violent. But I wanted to make sure we got content out, and also to announce what our next series will be. I know there's some of you that are saying, but you never finished the Shiloh videos, you never finished... I know, and I'm going to get back to it. I plan to do a big series the way I did with the Army of the Potomac and Army of Northern Virginia with that. But I just find this is very fascinating, and also this was something a few people recommended I should do, because they're very interested by the subject. But thank you so much for joining us today, friends. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, share, and comment. If you didn't, please comment. Tell me what I could do better. If you're returning to the channel and not yet subscribed, please, please, please subscribe. And also, I am aware a lot of you are returning viewers, so please, please subscribe. If you're new to the channel, we have a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining us today, friends, and we will see you in the next one.